So in our today's session, we are going to cover something about interface analysis. Now, when I say interface, what comes into your mind? What do you feel? What could be interface in the world of software programming? User interface. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So essentially, when we say interface, user interface is fine. That is definite a part of your software system in a typical project or in a typical industry. But there are other aspects to it as well. Now, whatever we do at this point of time as a business analyst, we tend to analyze interfaces basis on the information that we have pertaining to our current system that is under analysis. Now, imagine a scenario wherein we are working as a business analyst, wherein our current system is integrated with multiple other systems. So there could be system A, B, C. There would be your current system who would be interacting with this system A, B, and C. Now, when we interact with these particular systems, system A, system B, system C, now when a user comes to your particular portal or a particular website, he puts his information in your particular website. He doesn't interact with the other system like system A, B, or C. So what we do essentially is we take all the information from the user and we pass those information to system A, system B, and system C. Now that is something the system does internally. User feels that he is interacting with your system, but actually your system is interacting with multiple other systems in order to provide the information the user is looking for. To give you an example, if you go for a particular website like Skyscraper, now that particular website gives you details about the cheapest flight that are available in your destination or in your route that you have searched for. You go to that Skyscraper website, you put the destination origin point, sorry, the journey origin point and your destination point and the date when you are looking to fly. Now, depending on your start point and end point, it suggests you the flight information from different airlines. Now, how Skyscraper website is able to fetch this information? It's because to the fact that it is internally interacting with these airline systems. So you enter the start point and end point and the date when you wish to fly, and depending on that particular time slot, it interacts with different airline system and gives you a consolidated results wherein you can choose whichever flight you want. Now, user feels that all the information is available in Skyscraper website, but that is not the fact. The information are being fetched and presented runtime. Runtime as in at that point of time when you are making a call to this particular system. So what happens essentially in this particular scenario is these calls that you make to different airlines are real-time calls. Therein, you get the real-time pricing information from their website. Now, this particular Skyscraper website, it is just acting as a mediator between the user like you and me and the airline system. Mediator as in the you can think of that mediator like a facilitator who is taking information from you as a user, passing that information to the airline system, and then taking the response from the airline system and passing that information to the user like me and you. So that is the purpose of these particular websites. Now, in general practice, you can see multiple places wherein these things are happening. In software industry also, whenever we feel like integrating our system to a third party system, we first develop a UI wherein we would be taking inputs from user. Depending on the input, it sends a request to the third party system. The third party system sends a response to the system to which the user is interacting, and the user is able to see that real time information. Now, what is the benefit that we are achieving out of these particular interfaces or these particular mechanism? The benefit is like reduction in the development cost. We need not to, create everything from scratch. We are just sending some request and getting some response. So that is the minimal work that we need to do. Essentially, the connecting work that we do with the third party system. So that saves us a lot of development effort. Secondly, the information that we send and receive are all real-time information. So there is no such issues like a mismatch of information or something of that sort. The information is very authentic, and since we are sending and receiving this information in real time, we can rely on those particular information. Now here, the only thing that we develop in that particular system is the UI and the connection between the data elements in the UI. For example, in this airline system, the connection between the start point and end point is the only information that we need to receive the flight details from the respective airlines websites or respective airlines flight schedule. So that is how interface works. Now, essentially, if we see in our today's agenda, we have these many things to cover. We would understand what is interfaces, then we would identify interfaces from a perspective of business analysis. Then we would understand some of the golden rules for interface analysis, some UI design trends, the 4 UI design models, the elements of UI design and evaluation process, what are web APIs and how to use them, and we will see an example of PayPal API, how it works. Now, this connection or the mediator example which I gave you, in programming world, they are called as APIs, application programmable interfaces. Now, this API is the connector who sits between the user and the third party system and establishes a real-time connection between the user and the third party system with the help of the messages or your send and receive request or request and responses. Now, the first thing that we need to understand in interfaces are like it is a shared boundary between two components. So most systems require connection with other application, hardware, peripheral device to function properly. So interface analysis is a business analysis elicitation technique that helps us identify interfaces between solution application to determine the requirements for ensuring that the components interact with one another effectively. Now this is an example of when our system is interacting with a proprietary or a vendor third party system. Now, what about the components within our system? For example, in insurance, we have a policy system, we have a billing system, we have reporting system, and we have claim system. Now, these 4 systems are standalone, independent to each other. Now, when we wish to interact with these systems internally, then also we need to do interface analysis. For example, an insured purchased a policy. He got a policy for a period of 1 year. Now, within that 1 year period, now once he is issued that policy, the policy system would be interacting with the billing system with the insured name, first name, last name, and whatever demographic information the insured would be having, it would pass it on to the billing system. Now, basis on the plan he has opted for, whether it's a 1 year plan or whether the policy has been taken on installments like 5 pay or 3 pay or 11 pay plan, it would initiate the billing information for that particular insured. Now, after that, if something happens in between that 1 year, the claim system would be having the information about the claims that the insured has made for that particular policy. Now, in order to entertain claims for that particular insured, he need to fetch, I mean the claim system need to fetch the policy information like the insured first name, last name, as to which policy this claims needs to be tagged. So internally, these systems are interacting with each other. Now, the airline scenario is something wherein your core system is interacting with a system which is outside of your components ecosystem. So in this particular example, the policy, I mean insurance business example, we had the components internally, policy, billing, claims, and reporting. But in the other example of airline system, the components are external, like the respective airlines who would be giving you a real-time information. Now, essentially, there are three types of interfaces. First is your user interfaces, wherein human beings interact directly with the system. So, any XYZ interface that you interact in a particular website are generalized or typically categorized as user interfaces. Then there are interfaces which are to and fro from external system application, like the airline system example I gave you. Then there are interfaces to and fro from external hardware or gadgets. Now, what are these external hardware and gadgets? So, for example, you are going for a Sunday shopping in your local area. Now, therein you purchase something and therein you swipe your card. Now, when you swipe your card, the device that is capturing the um, debit details of your bank account is your POS terminal, the point of sale terminal. Now, that device is a hardware device. It's not a software device. The hardware is capturing the information. Now, that particular hardware system that is capturing your card details would send those card details, which is integrated to that hardware device, and that hardware device would send information to your banking system, wherein the banking system would approve, and basis on that approval, your sale would be succeeded and you would be checked out of that particular process. Now, here in this case, it's not that every time a software component would be interacting with a software component. It could be a hardware component as well. So essentially, that's the third part of the interface or third type of it interface. One is the very basic user interface. Second, there is interface to and fro from an external system, which are again software. Then there is interface to and fro from external hardware and gadget. So essentially, these are the three types of interfaces that you would be implementing when you are working as a business analyst, depending on the industry you work. Now, interface analysis helps in discovering the requirements needed to integrate software into a new environment. Now, interface analysis uncovers requirements that define how human beings interact with the system, how application link to other applications, and how hardware links to application need to be defined for effective functioning of the system. Now, in today's scenario, if you consider I mean, the mobile devices, let's say, for example, are capable of initiating payment for a particular sale at this point of time. If you consider the Samsung Pay and Apple Pay, they are capable of, acting as a physical credit card or debit card, wherein you just swipe it or tap it to the point of sale terminals, and your transaction would be successful. Now, as a business analyst, we need to understand the need of the situation, like what all ways the user would be interacting to our particular core system. Depending on our needs, we have to categorize our interface within one of these three types. Either it's the basic user interface, either it's interface to and fro for a software application, and whether it's an interface to or fro from an external hardware or gadgets. Now, in order to perform interface analysis, these are the three steps that you would be going through. The first step is preparation step, wherein you would review your current documentation, like we do generally in our business analysis work. Now, here the exception is, like, we would be reviewing the current documentation to identify if there are any interface requirement, especially when it comes to interface analysis, which is a business analysis technique. When we perform this particular technique in our business analysis work, we review the documentation to understand if there are any interfaces requirements there are in place. After that, we have to visualize the interface to and fro from external parties, application or devices. Like I said, if there are any external system or external devices or external applications which would be interacting with our system, we need to identify those objects that would be part of our interface work. After we have done the initial preparation, we would go for identification, wherein we need to identify what interfaces are needed for each stakeholder or system interacting with the system that is being defined. Now you have to also think from a user perspective. Now whatever example I gave you so far, this is a perspective from an end user. Now there would be multiple other users also who would be onboarded into that particular system, like the merchant who is selling the products, like the supplier who is supplying the physical products, like the distributor who is distributing the products. So how their interface would look like, we have to holistically think end to end, depending on those thinking and depending on those visualization. We need to identify whether for user application interface we need to consider prototyping technique or not for further detailed information. For application to application interface or external hardware interface, outline the contents and name related events. Now, if the interface is very simple, like we saw in our prototyping example, a simple prototype would suffice the purpose. But if the case is it's interacting from application to application or from an application to external hardware interface, then we need to outline the contents and the names of the related events. Now, what are the contents and what are the names of the related events? The content would be like when you are doing a sale through a point of sale terminal. Now, that's an hardware device. Now, what's the information it would be needing, or what's the content it would be needing? So, the content would be the credit card or debit card number. It's details like CVV number or the credit card expiry date, who is the issuer of the credit card or debit card, Visa, MasterCard, or Amex card, who is the issuing bank of that particular credit card, whether it's Bank of America or your Citibank or any XYZ bank. Depending on those information, it would send or it would charge a value. Now, what is the value? Value is the price of the product that you are intending to purchase. So first content, we would be needing the detailed information of the credit card. Second content, we would be needing the pricing information of that particular product. And what is the third content that we would be needing? Third content, we would be needing the merchant details, essentially the merchant ID, who is selling that particular product. Let's say you are going for a Walmart point of sale terminal, then the Walmart would be your merchant who is essentially selling you that particular product. So basis on these three information, we would look for an event. Now this event could be purchase event. Now this event could be a decline event. Now this event could be your card rejected event. So there are different events. If the product price that you are paying for or you are intending to pay for, and the amount that is there on your bank account is insufficient, then insufficient balance event would trigger on that point of sale terminal. If the product price is less than your account balance, then a successful or approved event would be triggered on your point of sale terminal. So depending on the event, you need to configure that particular hardware device accordingly. So there are certain events in a particular scenario or in a particular situation which are already pre-configured in that particular system, the basic events. Now if there are certain events that your business needs on top of those basic events, then you have to configure them as well as a business analyst. Now what would be the basic events in this point of sale example? The approved status, the transaction decline status, the balance insufficient fund status. So these are the basic three events that would come pre-configured. Now, if you want to add some additional events basis on your business or basis on the nature of business, that is also something that can be configured in any of these scenarios, not only with your application to external hardware interface, also in the scenario wherein your application is interacting with any other application or your user application interface as well. Now, after you have done that, you have to visualize interface to and fro from any external parties application or devices. Now you have identified the objects or the entities who would be interacting with the system. What are your interface wherein you would have these entities to interact? What is the content that would be used for interaction, or the messages that would be used for interaction, like what information you would be sending and what information you would be receiving, the request and response, and the related events, like what is the event that would trigger this particular action. Now, after we have identified all this thing, we have prepared all this thing, we need to define. Now here we need to specify interface requirement describing the inputs and output. So essentially, whenever you do interface analysis, we tend to define heavily the inputs and outputs that associated various rules and any events triggering these interactions. So our end goal of any particular interface analysis is to properly and appropriately identify what's the input that we would be giving to the system and what's the output we should expect out of that particular system. Now, of course, there would be some business rules associated with it, basis on the you know interaction that we would do, that would be triggered basis on the business rules that is configured. For example, if your credit card is issued in India, it is only meant to be used in India region only. You cannot go to the US and start using your Indian credit card or debit card. For that, the banking system gives you a different product like the forex card or an international credit or debit card. So same product cannot be used for same situation or different situation across the geographies. Depending on the geographies, your products are configured to be operational in those circumstances. So you need to identify as a business analyst what are those business cases. So use case is also something that would be heavily used when you do interface analysis in your business analysis work. Now, there are certain advantages and disadvantages of interface analysis. The advantages is like high level view of interoperability. You would get a high level view of how the system would work, how the system would be interacting with any other XYZ system or any external hardware devices. Then you can also plan the impact of delivery date, more accurate and potential time savings and cost. You can plan the collaboration with other systems or project. You can negotiate and cooperate between leaders of the involved applications. You can prevent difficulties of integrating multiple components, and the disadvantage would be it does not provide insight about other aspect of the solution, and it does not evaluate internal components. Now, what are these other aspects of the solution? Other aspects is like if you are interacting with any third party system like a PayPal or a banking system, it would only give you access to only those area of application, like whether the payment is successful or the payment is declined. It would only give you this information. It won't give you any XYZ information that are stored pertaining to that particular user in that banking system. So will you be able to access his loan account details or any what I would say mutual fund details or any insurance detail or any security details or stock details? No, those are also part of their banking system, but we are only allowed to access information about whether the purchase is successful or unsuccessful. We are only allowed to um, gain access to that particular area only. We cannot explore the other aspect of the banking system solution or the third party software offered by the banking system. So that is one of the disadvantage. Now, the other disadvantage is like it doesn't evaluate internal components. Now, internal components is like how the things work internally. That is something we are not bothered about, and it do not gives us those information. Now, that is an advantage actually, but when it would come as disadvantages, like when your core system is working properly and your vendor system is not working properly, so it gives you a feeling that why it is not working, your vendor system is not working properly, what is the best thing you could do? So the blunt answer to this question is you cannot do anything. If your vendor system is not functioning properly, then you have to completely rely on vendor system, because they don't give you access to their code base around how their system is integrated or how their system is coded. So you have to wait for that particular vendor. Until and unless it is not fixed, you cannot consume their services or you cannot consume their information. So this is a very generic thing that happens in every particular project. I'll give you an example of what happened in my project recently. So we had this vendor Verisk, wherein we used to get information. This was a third party system, Verisk system, wherein we used to get information about the replacement cost estimator, about a particular component in our homeowners insurance. Now their system was not functioning properly. Now they gave us an SLA that within 2 weeks we should be able to fix our system and you should be able to consume our services on your core application. Now we waited for 2 weeks and the system was not up by that time. So ultimately it took them 2 months to fix and bring up their system back into business. Until then, we were just waiting for their system to be up and so that we can start consuming their services to issue policy. So these are some of the disadvantage that is associated when you are dealing with interface. Of course, it saves you cost, but the thing is like everything comes for a price. If their system is down, you cannot do anything because ultimately we are just consuming their services. Now this spiral process.
Sunil, I have one question.
Mhm.
So in this situation, do they file incident reports and they do the incident analysis or anything like that, or just like
Yes,
they fix the system?
yes, we do submit a report around the issues that we face. Now, basis on our report or the issue that we have reported to them, they do their initial analysis and they give us some ETA around when this issue would be fixed. Now, if that issue is fixed during that time period, that's fine. If it is not fixed, then we don't have any choice. We have to wait for their system to be up and running.
Okay.
Now, when we do the UI analysis, now this is the first type of interfaces that we come across in our project. Now, for this UI analysis, we do it with the help of spiral process, the spiral process of prototyping that we saw during our earlier sessions. That is what we are going to use for interface development. So when we follow a spiral process, we first do interface analysis, wherein we identify who all users would be interacting with the system, what would be their task, and what would be the environment behind that particular work, whether it would be the human and computer oriented task or how the environment would be, whether it would be an external hardware, external gadget, or what it would be. Now, once we did this interface analysis, we identify the users, the task, and the environment associated to it. We go for interface design, wherein we set the interface objects and actions and their screen representation, how the screen would look like and how the users would come to that particular screen and what all actions they could perform in that particular screen. So that would come under interface design. After that, the construction of interface starts, wherein we begin with a prototype that enables user scenario to be evaluated, like what all circumstances would be there, what all situation would be there wherein the user would be interacting with that particular system. Once the construction is done or once the system is developed, we start with interface validation, where we focus on the ability of the interface to implement every task correctly and the to the degree which the interface is used and whether it's easy to learn or not, and the user's acceptance of that particular interface. Essentially, during interface validation, we just test out the system whether it is working as per the requirements specified in our interface analysis document or any software requirement specification document that we have created around analysis of this interface. Now, after this thing is done during a spiral process, we need to identify interface for a business analysis. So step one to identify the interface for the business analysis is to identify the user interface in business analysis, like who are the people we would be interacting with, what is their education level. It's not their college degree over here, it's the education level which is indicating how comfortable they are with using the system. Then what experience do they have with the solution? Now experience is like if it is an insurance domain solution, whether the user who would be interacting the system are familiar with that particular domain or not, insurance, banking, or any XYZ domain. Then are we dealing with the different levels of people? For example, regular customers, preferred customer, elite customer. So there are different kinds of level that are there in a particular system. So are we dealing with these levels of people or not? Now, any of these individuals have disabilities? Now, these are some of the regulatory norms wherein we need to configure our system for people with different abilities. If that is a requirement, then we need to take care of that as well. Now, once we identify the users who would be interacting with the particular system, the next step is to identify the system interfaces, like what all systems would be, what all interfaces we would be coming across throughout our analysis. Like what system are we interfacing to communicating or communicating with, like application to application, application to hardware, or simply the core components within that particular project. Then where are we getting our data, as in if it is a third party system, then where, which is the source of that particular information, and what is the format of that particular information by which we would be interacting. Now when you interact with another application which is coded in different language, for example, our core system is built on .NET, and the third party application with whom we are interacting is coded in Java. Now .NET and Java are two different languages in computer programming world. So how do we interact with these two systems? So there are some conversion mechanism or some messaging mechanism through which we can interact. For example, we send and receive information in JSON format. JSON is stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is a format wherein we exchange messages from one system to another. Now, what these message passing mechanism would do, it would collect the information from .NET interface, and it would convert that information into JSON format and send that information to the Java system in JSON format. Now, Java system would be having a capability wherein it would consume the information from JSON format, and it would convert that information to Java code or Java format, and then the system would be able to understand what this .NET system has done. So essentially, this mediator, the JSON message passing mechanism, would ultimately solve the problem wherein the issue comes within the technology the system is built in. Now you cannot restrict people or businesses on you have to use only this technology. No, you cannot do it. Some people may prefer PHP, some people may prefer Java, some people may prefer .NET. You cannot restrict them. But what you can build on top of that is the message exchanging mechanism or ecosystem, wherein every system would be accepting and sending information in those format only. The format could be JSON, the format could be XML, the format could be any XYZ message passing mechanism. Now, as a business analyst, we are not supposed to know what this messages does, how these are programmed, but to a very high level, we need to know what is the format in which the message are being sent, and what are the information that are being sent, and what are the information that we receive. These are the only things that we need to understand as a business analyst. Now here, when you identify system interfaces, here you need to know what system are we interfacing or communicating with, where are we getting our data, and who are we sending information to. Who are, as in the external systems, whether it's software system or hardware system. Now once we are done with identifying user, identifying system interfaces, the third thing is we have to understand identifying hardware interfaces, like when we capture data, where it goes, how we will display that information, who needs to see it, where will the information in our application come from. These sort of information that we need to understand when we deal with identifying the hardware interfaces. So once we are done with all this thing, we are good to go with our regular documentation part. Now how we would get this information? By conducting effective requirement elicitation sessions. There are multiple techniques that you are aware of: interviewing, brainstorming. Use those techniques, create some initial prototypes, get it approved from the stakeholder, and you can have a discussion around it. But before initiating those discussion, you need to first understand what are the essential things that you need to configure when it comes to interface analysis. Now, once you are done with that, you need to understand some of the golden rules for interface design, like placing the user in control. You need to define the interaction modes in a way that does not force a user into unnecessary or undesired action. So you have to avoid those things which confuses the user. So you need to think from an user perspective over there. Then you have to provide or facilitate flexible interactions like keyboard commands, mouse movement, or voice recognition, whichever would be convenient for the user, or the user should be flexible enough to deal with. So you need to provide with those flexible interaction mechanisms. You need to allow user interaction to be uninterruptible and undoable. Like the user shall be able to easily interrupt a sequence of action and do something else without losing the work that has been done so far. So user shall be able to undo any action. So let's say you are filling an job application form, and all of a sudden you close that browser window. Now all the information that you have entered in that job application form is wasted. No, you should be having a mechanism wherein you could keep that session alive. The next time you open the browser and type the URL, some of the information, not all information, some of the information should be pre-filled by that particular application, because the session is still alive, it is not closed. You have to take care of that part as well. Then you have to hide technical internals from the casual user. So user shall not be required to directly use operating system, file management, networking, etc., or commands to perform any actions. Instead, these operations shall be hidden from the users and performed behind the scenes. Now what happens in modern day system is, like earlier what is to happen, if you need to find certain information, especially if you are aware of a functionality called as data scrapper. Now, what that functionality does, it's a piece of code that people write, and they steal all the information from the website UI. For example, you are having a shopping website. In that particular shopping website, you have the product images, the product description, the product price. All the information would be scrapped from that particular website and would be stored in an Excel sheet. Now, what are the circumstances people would take that particular step? Imagine a scenario that you want to come up with your own website wherein you need to sell some, you have to compete with your competitor. Now, in that particular context, you would be needing lots of data. Now, you know how expensive is the data in a particular market. You have to pay for that information, everything, and all those stuff. Now what you would do, you would write a code, you would ask your developer to write some code wherein you could copy all the information from the website, and you can build a similar website in that particular lines that your competitor has. And the information, in order to give them a tough competition, you would adjust some of the information, like the pricing information. If he is selling it at $40, you would be selling it at $38. So that's how you are saving time. Now, although it's an unethical way, but people do so. So in our interface analysis context as well, we need to restrict such behavior or such action from the system. Now, if you go to this particular milestone learning website, the right click is disabled, the print screen is disabled. You cannot copy any content from that particular website. Why? Because we feel that the content is liable to be copied. So for that reason, we have restricted those user actions like print screen, copying a particular information, pasting a particular information, so that we are restricting ourselves from publicizing the information, or posting those information in the public domain without our explicit written consent. So these are some of the information or some of the aspects that you need to take into consideration when you are analyzing a particular interface. Now this is one example. There are other examples as well. What people generally do is they copy the control IDs. So if you go to Google Chrome and visit a particular website and press F12, and take your mouse pointer to a particular text box or drop down or radio button, you should be able to see a unique ID of that particular control. Now, if that particular unique ID is hacked by a particular hacker, it would be a huge cost to your particular project. So you need to restrict those kind of actions that a user can take, the unethical actions when you are designing an interface. You have to document it somewhere, because developers are like brainless people. They would code whatever you have given them. These are some of the information that we need to understand right uh, from day one, and we need to guide the developer to maintain the highest level of coding standard, so that our system is not hacked or our system is safe in the public domain when it is operational. Then comes design for design interaction with objects that appear on the screen. So user should be able to manipulate objects on a screen in a manner similar to what would occur if the object were a physical thing. Example, stretching a rectangle, pressing a button, moving a slide. So we have to configure these behavior as well. How it would look like if the object would be a real thing or physical thing. For example, you might have seen some of the online libraries wherein you could flip the page. The example you can take of Amazon Kindle app, wherein you turn the page, a page turning sound would come, and you would see the page as if it is you are doing with a physical book. So that is a real world action that you are configuring to that particular system. So these are some of the things that you need to take into consideration. Now, once you are done with that, you need to reduce users memory load, wherein you need to reduce demand on short time memory. So you need to understand the memory needs of the system as well, and basis on those memory or the what I would say resource management aspects, essentially the non-functional requirement, you would be configuring your system, because if there is too much of information stored in your system, it would ultimately slow down your system. So you need to take those elements into consideration as well. Then you have to define shortcuts that are intuitive, like control or alt combination, if there are any. In, essentially, in a Windows operating system, you have some shortcodes. I mean, shortcodes that comes handy, wherein you are playing a movie, you press the space bar and action happen. You press the arrow key up and down, left and right, and action happen. So these are nothing but a combination of keys and shortcuts that you could use in your particular software system as well. Then the visual layout of the interface should be based on the real world metaphor. Like, it should always be well understood visual that the user can relate to real world action. Like I gave you the example of Amazon Kindle app. Then disclose information in a progressive fashion. When interacting with a task, an object, or some behavior, the interface shall be organized hierarchically by moving the user progressively, like text format option, format dialog box, and so on, which gives an information in a progressive fashion. For example, the breadcrumb. Whenever you are on a particular page, you should be able to understand his hierarchy from where you are coming to that particular page. On top of every page, you could see a breadcrumb, wherein you see from where you are coming to that particular page. What is the hierarchy of the information organization in that particular website? Now, the more a user has to remember, the more error prone interaction with the system will be. So you need to consider this statement as your base or your starting point, that the more a user has to remember, the more error prone interaction with the system will be. So you need to make the transitions or make the interaction as smooth as possible, as simple as possible. The more the user remembers, the more the error user would commit in that particular system when it comes to interface design. Now, this is something that we do in the context of the system, wherein we are just concerned about the UI, not the call between one system to another, either through a software system or through a hardware system. Now, when we consider the UI of a particular system, or the basic user interaction for a particular system, basic user interface design, so there are certain design trends that are in place. So the very first um, design trend is minimalism, then comes skeuomorphism, then there is laser focus, then there is context sensitive navigation, collapsed content, content chunking, and long pages. We'll see an example of each one of it. But before that, we need to understand what is user interface designing trends. So whenever there is a user, there would always be a user interface. As graphic and web designer, our priority is not only to create good looking stuff, it's to create stuff that's actually easy to use and create minimum user interface friction. User interface friction as in the user is comfortable with that particular UI. It shouldn't be very confusing to the users when they are coming to your particular application. Now in these nature of projects wherein your projects are heavily influenced by the design layouts created by graphic and web designer, and you are working as a business analyst, you need to consider these 7 things when it comes to designing your user interface. Now what are these 7 designing trends? Now the very first thing is minimalism. Glossy icons are replaced by simple one color version or text based column. So if you could see, instead of writing so much information, you can put some of the icons, which would give you the initial impression around what this thing would have. When you click on messaging, okay, it would have message. When you click on email, okay, it would have all my email. When you click on video, okay, I get it, it would be all video. So even though you don't write that 4 5 sentences around what's the core functionality of that particular button or that particular image would be, you can convey that message with the help of one color version of the icons that you create. So that is called as minimalism, wherein you are minimizing the information and introducing the users with graphic. And as you know, human brain are more sensitive to the pictorial representation. They understand picture more than reading one paragraph of sentences. So it's very handy that we introduce our users with the icons that we would be consistently using in our system, like the email, the weather, the camera, or XYZ. Depending on these icons, they should be able to understand what would be the core functionality of the system. Then comes skeuomorphism. Now, skeuomorphism is the design concept of making items representing and resembling their real world counterparts. So let's say you are having an online library app wherein you would see the information as if they are on the library shelf, and when you pick a book you should be able to flip the pages as and when. So they are representing the real library that you see in that you see physically in a particular given context. So this is a situation wherein you would be using skeuomorphism user interface designing trends. So if you consider your Amazon Prime application or your this Netflix application, they are all based on skeuomorphism design, wherein you see as if the titles are kept in a particular video library shelf. Then comes laser focus. Now laser focus is focused on user interface, puts visual focus on a single obvious task to do once a user opens the web page. Now when you open a Google web page, what is the need of you opening the Google web page? It's essentially you would be searching for an information. So what you do in your particular UI, you put a laser focus on the search functionality where you would be searching the item. So that is like bringing your users attention to the search bar wherein you would be typing the information. So that kind of design trend is called as laser focus user interface. Then comes context sensitive navigation. Now, which navigation element should be on screen all the time and what can be shown only in certain situations? For example, you are going for a Facebook post, therein you see like, comment, subscribe, all those options. Now, these are the common things or common action that the user would take on a particular post. So, we would be doing a context sensitive navigation wherein we would be giving user the common actions that the user would be doing throughout that particular application. So most of the this social networking site, they use context sensitive navigation feature. Then comes collapsible content. Now here we would hide non-essential options and widgets under one link. which will expand and collapse on users request. For example, when we open the Gmail application, we would have these categorization like Google Plus application, wherein we would be having these categorization: all, friends, family, and more. Why we did more? Why we cannot expand it all in this particular line in a linear way? Because we felt the need that is not needed. Users would be satisfied with these three options only. If they need more option, then they would explore these options. So we need to understand, when we are designing a system, what are the core or common things the user would be doing. We would place it over here. And what are the optional thing that the user would be doing, that would hide in the collapsible content. So any XYZ website menu you see, you would be having this collapsible menu. Then comes content chunking. Now, hide content chunking is a technique of presenting a large amount of content in a smaller visual chunk. So it's easier for people to read and mentally digest. So for example, if you go for a digital product in a particular website, you see content and its image side by side, so that you first see the image, you get an idea about what this functionality would be like. In this particular screen, you see these are highlighting retina display. So they are first giving you an image of that particular laptop, and then they are describing the information what they would like to project. So before even reading this word, you can get a view that it is something related to display. Now that is a trend what you adopt when it comes to user interface designing trend. Then comes long pages. Now long pages are something which requires a lot of scrolling and are now all over the web. So if in case you feel your information is too long or too much to be accommodated in one page, what you would do, you would divide that information in certain section, and you would show, display a button wherein you would be highlighting it like view details or view more or read more, because the information is very long in nature. Once they click on that particular information they are interested in, they can go through that particular article or that particular page that they are looking for. Until and unless they are not interested, why to show them such lengthy pages? So this is also one of the designing trends that we look for when we are designing a user interface. Now then, there are 4 UI models that we essentially use. Now these models are when it comes to interface analysis, this model are something called as user profile model, which is established by a human engineer or a software engineer. Then there is design model, which are created by a software engineer. Then there is implementation model, which are again created by a software implementers. And then there are users mental model, which are developed by the user when they are interacting with the application. The user profile model is something: who all are the user, what are their levels, what are their permission, what are their restriction, all would come under user profile model. Design model is like how the model or the information would be designed. Few examples we just saw. Then there would be implementation model, how the system would be coded. And then there would be user mental model, wherein we would come up with use cases and scenarios which would help us understand how the user would be interacting with the system. Now, the role of interface designer is to reconcile these differences and derive a consistent representation of the interface. So when we go for interface analysis, it's not just about one particular interfaces. There are multiple interfaces that we need to deal with. So as an interface designer or a developer or whoever is accountable for this particular interface designing, he need to maintain a consistent look and throughout that particular application. For example, if we open a Facebook application or Facebook system, we see a consistency in that particular application. We see the content cards which are consistent in nature. We see the blue strip to the top which are consistent in nature. We see the image size which are consistent in nature. We see the video size which are consistent in nature, and any XYZ information which are consistent in nature. Any page you navigate, any user's profile you visit, these UI or design elements are consistent in nature. It won't look different on different user profiles page. However, the content would be different, but the container which holds that content would be same. The height, the width, the glossy finish of that particular content or the card would remain the same. So we are just designing those templates or those blueprints in that particular system, and the content would be based on the user who is using it and the way it is coded. Now, when we consider the user profile model, we need to categorize our users as novice, knowledgeable intermediate user, or knowledgeable frequent user. So depending on these three category of the user, we need to define our user profile model. Now, what is the essential activity that we do in user profile model is we establish the profile of end users of the system. We consider syntactic knowledge of the user, and we consider semantic knowledge of the user. Now, establishing the profile of end users is very simple. It would be based on the age, gender, physical abilities, education, cultural or ethnic background, motivation, goals, and personality. That is very common thing that you would be doing when you would be establishing the profile of end user who would be interacting with the system. Then comes considering syntactic knowledge of the user, like the level of interaction that are required to use the interface effectively, like how he would be interacting with that particular user, whether he would be a frequent user, whether he would be a you know just a one-time user, or whether he would be a daily user, those kind of things. And then comes your semantic knowledge of the user, wherein we need to understand the underlying sense of the application and understanding of the functions that are performed and the meaning of input and output. For example, if you open a particular Facebook application, it's a social networking website. So we understood what's the functionalities would be there in Facebook application pertaining to social networking, like sharing option, deleting option, uploading option. So basis on the nature of the application, we would define the functionalities for that particular application, like what way the application would be used in that particular given context. Now, once we are done with user interface, this profile modeling, we do the design modeling, the implementation modeling, and users mental modeling as it is needed. So main focus as a business analyst would be the user profile modeling. Rest all thing would be taken care of by your development team, the design and the implementation model. And user mental model is something wherein we define what is the semantic and syntactic aspect of that particular application, like what is the core purpose of that particular application, and what would be the functionalities that would this application hold basis on the nature of that particular project. So this is where we would be designing the user mental model, wherein we would understand the persona of that user, who is that user, how he would be using that particular system. Now, when it comes to understanding the elements of UI design, there are various elements that comes into the picture when it comes for user interface designing. The first is the user analysis, then comes your task analysis, then comes your content analysis, and then comes your work environment analysis. Now, what are these four things? So first thing is the user who will interact with the system through the interface. So those are users. The tasks are that the end user must perform to do their work, what they would be doing in the system. And the content is that is presented as part of the interface, what you are presenting to the user, and the work environment in which these tasks will be conducted, essentially the environmental constraint. Now, when we do a user analysis, we tend to identify who are the users, how these people would use the system. Now here we can understand the information like user interviews. How we can do user analysis is like we can conduct interviews, we can do some sales input, we can take some marketing input, we can take some support input. Depending on the category of the user, we have to collect some information as a business analyst so that we do our user analysis completely and diligently. These are some of the typical questions that you would ask to different users when you are doing user analysis. For example, are the users trained professionals, technician, clerical, or manufacturing worker? What level of formal education does the average users have? Are the users capable of learning on their own from written materials, or have they expressed a desire for classroom training? Are the user expert typist, or are they keyboard phobic? What is the age range of the user community? Will the users be represented predominantly by one gender? Do users work normal office hours, or they work whenever the job is required? Now, although the question may seem casual, but if you see, every question has some sort of information that could be captured in our business analysis work. Like, what is the level? What the level of formal education does the average user have? So here we can understand or conclude that how should be the language of the system, how should be the option of the system configured, whether we need to hide some option, whether the users are smart enough to explore option within the system or explore functionalities within the system, or we have to educate to them by sending some of the notification in the system, like if you click on this particular drop down, select fourth option, and then you will see that particular page. So we would get an information around it or an idea around it basis on their formal education background, like what all things that are required to be configured in that particular system. We need not to put everything over there. We can get a fair idea around it by looking at the answers that we got from these particular questions. Now, when you are sending a questionnaire to your business customer, you always follow this particular questionnaire format. It shouldn't be direct question, rather it is a question within question, the way you could ask to the user, because if you don't put it this way, the user or the person whom you are interviewing or whom you are sending this questionnaire may get confused looking at these the volume of the question. So you have to minimize the number of the question. At the same time, you have to encourage the user so that he can give you a better visibility around what is being asked in the question. Now, the next element of UI analysis is task analysis and modeling. Now, here you would be defining all your use cases. Now, why do we do task analysis? So there are essentially these reasons why we do task analysis. We need to understand the work the user performs in specific circumstances. We need to understand the task and subtask that will be performed as the user does the work, the specific problem, domain, object that the user manipulates as work is performed, the sequence of work tasks, that is workflow, and the hierarchy of tasks. So essentially, how the workflow of the system would work. That is something that we are intending to achieve with the help of task analysis and modeling. And how we would be achieving our task analysis and modeling work with the help of use cases, wherein we would show how an end user performs specific task. After we have done that, we need to do some content analysis, wherein the display content may range from character based report to graphical display to multimedia information. So how we would be presenting our content to the user for further interaction, whether it would be a graphical notation, whether it would be a textual notation, whether it would be a video training video, whether it would be a user manual. So that is something we need to understand after we have done user analysis and task analysis. Now, these are the some of the content analysis guideline, like a typical set of questions that we need to ask when you are doing content analysis, like are various types of data assigned to consistent location on the screen? Example, photos always in upper right corner. Then, are users able to customize the screen location for content? Is proper on-screen identification assigned to all content? Can large reports be partitioned for ease of understanding? Or is graphical output scaled to fit within the boundary of the display device that is used? How is color used to enhance understanding? So these are some of the information that we need to understand when we start representing our system to the end customer. So these are the content analysis guidelines, how we would be outlining our content in that particular system. So that is the third activity. After that, we do a work environment analysis, wherein software products are needed to be designed to fit into that work environment. Otherwise, they may be difficult or frustrating to use. So the factors would be display size and height, keyboard size, height, and ease of use, mouse type and ease of use, surrounding noise, space limitation for computer, or weather or other atmospheric condition, temperature or pressure restriction, time restriction, when, how fast, and for how long. So these are something, the environment that you need to consider when you are building those elements for your user interface analysis. Essentially, the user analysis, the task analysis, the content analysis, and the work environment analysis. Once you are done with all this analysis, your user interface is ready for end users consumption. Now, once you are done with all your analysis, like the user profile analysis, the task analysis, then your work environmental analysis, you need to do your user interface design and evaluation process, wherein you would be identifying whatever you have designed so far, whether it meets the um, expected results or not. So here in the user interface design process, you design all your user interface, the objects, the actions, the operation, the end users needs, their look and feel of the interface, how the user would be interacting with those systems. You, basis on the golden rules that I explained you have to evaluate the designing part, whether the designing part conforms all those parameters or not. Now, in the evaluation process, you need to understand whatever system that you have built, whether the amount of learning is required or not, then the interaction time and overall efficiency of the solution, the memory constraints, the complexity of the user interface, whether the system is getting too complex for the users or not. These are some of the information that you need to evaluate when you are evaluating your actual system against the prototype which you have done. Now, prototyping, as it may look simple to you, it's not that simple. You have to consider lot many things when you are designing the prototype, because ultimately the prototype would end up being the actual user interfaces. So you have to put lot of thought process around designing a particular prototype. Had it been that simple, the development team could have created the prototype. Why it is the work of a business analyst? Because there are lot many things that you need to consider, from a user profile perspective till task, till content analysis, till how you would be doing the work environment and environment analysis. So there are multiple factors that you need to consider when you are creating a UI screen or prototype for your development team. So developer would never ever think in this particular situation or circumstances. It's you as a business analyst, you need to put the thought behind the prototypes and get it approved. So once that is done, once the system is implemented based on the prototype that you present to the development team, you do the evaluation process and tend to uncover some of the hidden aspect of that particular work that you have delivered to the business. Now, this all that we saw just was part of your user interface design, wherein your user interface are restricted to your system only, your actual core system. Now, what about the case when it would be interacting with any third-party system? So there you would be using web APIs, web application interface, that would be interacting with um, uh, you know your core system and the third party system. So web APIs are the mediator or the middleware applications which would be interacting with the third party system. Now, essentially, this web APIs are a set of functionalities that are given or exposed by the third-party system to be consumed by your system. For example, the common functionalities like making a purchase or initiating a refund or checking out. These are some of the common functionalities the web APIs would offer. Now, every website, every company has a set of web APIs with them. For example, if you want to integrate Amazon system into your system, they offer you some of the web APIs which you can consume, get their data, and do all the processing and send final result to them. If you consider the PayPal system, it works that way. Now, what are web APIs and how they look like? If you go by the definition of web API, it's an application programming interface for either a web server or a web browser. It is a web development concept usually limited to a web application client side, including any web frameworks being used, and thus usually does not include web server or browser implementation details such as APIs unless publicly accessible by a remote web application. Now, this is the definition. Now, if we had to understand the definition, this is a particular system wherein the web API is there, the third party system. Now, the third party system would be having a database associated to their particular system, and the API would be having all the business logic as in, if you consider the PayPal API, it would be having business logic like taking payment, initiating refund, checking out your product. So those are functionalities are part of your business logic, which the PayPal API would be having. Now, those API would be consumed by your application and it would be exposed to the end user using various browser, or if you are accessing the application via a particular system like a Windows application, Windows mobile or Android mobile or Apple iPhone, they would look very similar. Essentially, the web API is the mediator who communicates between different devices and different applications under different browsers, which is consuming the API of PayPal. Now, all the transaction that you do via your cell phone or website would be stored or sent to the PayPal application, and the PayPal database would store the information. Your database won't be storing that information, your application database. The third party applications database would be storing that information. For example, the credit card information or the payment information or the payment details or the refund information. Those are the information that would be stored in the PayPal's database, not your database. Your database would only be consuming the business logic via the API that PayPal has offered. For example, if we see this particular diagram over here, this is the PayPal API's checkout process. Now, checkout is an functionality the PayPal API gives to the end customer. For example, you are having your web browser wherein you are having a product listed. When you check out, you click on the PayPal button. Now, when you click on the PayPal button, what the PayPal API, what information the PayPal API receives? It receives the amount and the format of the currency. Like if the amount is like 5, you have set for that particular product, the currency format is USD. On clicking of this PayPal checkout button, it would send that 5 USD in 5 number in USD format to PayPal payment API. Now, what PayPal payment API would do, after processing that particular information, it would send a payment ID. It would generate a unique payment ID. Now, once that particular payment ID is generated, it would ask you to log in. Once the user logs in, it would send that information, the payer ID and payment ID, to the PayPal API. Once the processing is done, it would send those final information to the PayPal payment API, and towards the end, you would be getting your thanks for your payment page, wherein you have received your payment or the PayPal API has received your payment and your order is confirmed. Now, during this process, if we stress on the payment API part, what are the core data elements it stores? It stores the payment ID, the payer ID, the payment API, and the payment amount. What is the price of the product? What is the unique ID of that particular payment? And what is the payer ID and what is the payment ID? Payer ID is like whoever is making a payment through PayPal. So every user would be having a unique payer ID, which the PayPal API would consume. Basis on that information, it would send via the payment ID whether the transaction is successful or not. If it's a failed transaction, then you won't be able to purchase the product. But if it's a successful transaction, then you should be able to get this message that thanks for your payment, and the next course of action would be taken into consideration. Now, this is what the mediator does when you do certain set of actions in a particular web application. Now, there are certain other constraints that are in place. Now, if you see this particular payment API, it has given us so many functionality like generating a payment ID and consuming the payment payer ID, then using the payment API, then consuming the payment amount in dollars or any XYZ currency it has. Do you think all this services PayPal would offer to you free of cost? No, they won't offer you free of cost. Rather, they would charge you for it. I mean, the person who has integrated the PayPal services into their website, they would charge you for that. Now, this charge can be a subscription based or can be a pay per use based. Pay per use is like how many requests you are making to PayPal API. Per request would be charged. For example, here you are requesting a payment of 5 USD. So every time you request a payment of 5 USD, via PayPal API, PayPal would charge you a amount for that particular request. It could be a 10 cent, it could be a 5 cent. So that is pay per use when it comes to payment API. Then there is subscription based plan. Subscription based plan is like you would be paying a monthly subscription of let's say $50 per month, wherein you get 1,000 calls free. After you have exhausted that 1,000 calls, the additional calls would be charged at a rate of 5 cents or 2 cents per request and response. So this is how the payment API actually earns money out of these APIs. If you consider the Uber API or any XYZ company's API wherein you are using, every API has these two basic models. Pay per use, wherein your each request and response would be charged, and then there would be your subscriptions, wherein there would be unlimited request and response, or there could be a threshold set like only 1,000 requests under this particular package. So this is how the web APIs makes money out of their particular business. Now, as a business analyst, we need to focus on these parameters like payment ID, payer ID, then amount, currency. We need not to concern about how this API is implemented, how it stores information, how the billing is generated. That is none of our business. Our business is like what information is sent and what information is received, what input we are giving and what output we are receiving. That is our area of business. Now that is about the pricing part. The other part when we use a particular web API is whether we want to use the API the way it is available to us or whether we want to customize the UI of that particular API. For example, if I go to my particular website, therein I have directly integrated PayPal services in this particular website. If you open this particular website and kind of check out a particular service, you would see the UI is exactly similar to the PayPal UI. I haven't done any particular customization. So let's say I do this thing. And I select the payment mode as PayPal. Now the UI that you would see on the next page is the core PayPal UI. I haven't done any sort of customization basis on the look and feel of my website. That is the core vanilla UI that you see on this particular website. I did not have done any particular customization. So here I am saving cost by using their infrastructure itself. I could have done it on my website itself. I wouldn't have asked the PayPal payment gateway to use this UI which they are providing. I could have done it my particular website as well. Instead, I would have been integrating these fields which PayPal is offering with my custom text fields that I would have configured. But in order to save the development cost and all this information, instead of setting up all this infrastructure and hosting it on my particular website, I'm redirecting the payment stuff altogether to PayPal API or the PayPal infrastructure. So in your case also, when you start working for a particular system, there would be two options available to you. Either use the APIs as it is available to you, or customize your API and just consume their data inputs, or the inputs that you enter within the text box. Now, the option could be either create a similar page in my website and link those elements to the PayPal web interface, or PayPal API, or directly use the infrastructure that I am using over here. So there are always two options when you configure your system to be connected with a third party system. So that is what the options that you have when you are configuring your web APIs with a particular core system. Now this is the PayPal checkout process. Now, during that particular checkout process, there are two things that you need to consider: the client integration and the server integration. Now, what is client integration? Like how you would be integrating the system from a web browser. All the devices from where you are accessing the application is the client integration. Like the example which I showed you in my particular website, that is a client integration, wherein your buyer clicks on a PayPal button. The PayPal button calls the PayPal API to set up the payment, and the button starts the checkout flow in your particular browser. This is the client integration process, which happens and visible to me on the web page, which we just saw. Then there is server integration process, wherein your buyer clicks the PayPal button. The PayPal button calls the server. Your server calls the PayPal API to set up the payment, and the button launches the checkout flow in the buyer's browser window, which essentially deals with calling with your PayPal server, wherein the PayPal server actually comes in place. So these are the two sort of integration that you could make. This is just an example of PayPal process. Any XYZ information or any XYZ domain that you consider would be having similar situation, wherein you would be doing server side integration of API or the client side integration of the API. Client side integration is essentially storing all your information within your particular application, and server side integration is like storing a copy of the information in your particular application and the actual information in the server side application. For example, I won't be able to store the credit card details, the checkout process which I showed you. I can only store information like whether the order is completed or not. Only those information I can store in my website. I cannot store the credit card details, or whether all the details that you are seeing, the sensitive information essentially in that particular PayPal checkout page. Those information would be stored on PayPal's database. It won't be stored on my database. So that is something the beauty of API is. Depending on the nature and the need, you should be able to store what sort of information you feel like and what sort of information you do not feel like. Now, I do have an option for storing the credit card information on my particular website, but I have to take the accountability of handling those sensitive information. If tomorrow, in case my website gets hacked, I don't have that much capability or capital to invest on bringing a situation wherein I should be able to deal with people disputes arising out of it on my particular website. So what's the feasible option I saw here is store sensitive information on the PayPal database. Only relevant information would be stored on my particular page, whether the order is confirmed or not, those kind of information. So depending on the nature of the business, depending on the context, you should be able to um, you know uh, distinguish between what information you have to store on your system and what information you don't have to store on your system. Rather, it's good to be stored in the third party system. So essentially, in any system, all the credit card, all the sensitive information details are stored on the third party system. We just consume those information just to ensure that the amount is received by our end for making that purchase or not. So to summarize, today we understood the interfaces, the identification of interfaces for business analysis, some of the rules for interface analysis, the UI design trends, the UI design models, the elements of UI design, the UI design and evaluation process, the web APIs, and we saw an example of PayPal API.